When we sit down, it's time for the conversation. And joining me today to put matters back to school into perspective is Jasper Ondemu. He is an education expert and doubles up as a teacher at Light Academy. Our second guest is Dorka Ngulu. She is a seasoned journalist and also a parent to students who've gone back to school. Dorka and Jasper, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Jasper, let me begin with you. Schools have been reopened, and they were reopened on the 12th of October. Do you think it was safe enough to allow our children to go back to school?
First, thank you, Ondiro, for inviting me to the show. I totally appreciate. On that particular question, the schools closed in March when Kenya registered its first case of COVID-19. And stakeholders hoped that the government was going to use that particular break to address some of the issues that had been bedeviling the education sector. I mean, construction of more classrooms, addressing the issues of human resource. We have some counties like the northern frontier district, as it was previously known as Marsabit, Mandera, where teachers had actually got out of those regions for fear of insecurity. And therefore, the government could have used this particular opportunity to address those particular concerns. And Kenya was not taking any steps to ensure that safe reopening was actually actualized. We had UNICEF and WHO that was telling African governments it is time to open schools because some of the inequalities that were existing before COVID-19 have accelerated right now. And therefore, the government found itself in a catch-22 situation because Kenya was among the few countries in Africa, actually the only country in Africa that did not know when it was to open school. So reopening school is a welcome move. I mean, the question someone can ask, if we were to wait for January, would have COVID-19 have subsided? The answer is definitely no. So the government didn't put all the necessary measures that were required, and it had no alternative but to ask the kids to be in school. And it is interesting to see, I mean, if you're going to have cases of COVID-19 in schools, what is going to happen? So, I mean, that is a wait and see. But Kenya had no option. It was the best thing to open the schools. But if we were prepared, the answer is definitely no.
Okay. Prepared or not, the announcement was made and kids were supposed to go back to school. Actually, they've gone back to school. Dorka, you're a parent. When the circular came out that Magoha and the Ministry of Education have directed students to go back to school, what went through your mind as a parent, bearing in mind the current COVID-19 situation in the country?
Thank you, Ondiro. The first thing that went through my mind, I was like, does this government even put into consideration the parents? Understand that some of us have kids in grade 4, class 8, and Form 4. Like, they're all there. And you have to arrange yourself in a manner that they need the school fees, they need the shopping. Remember, their uniforms are small and all that. They need the shopping. They need to be done everything. So now, for my case, for example, I have two. Like, I have a grade 4 and I have a Form 4. So I have to make sure, like, I had to make sure that they have their uniforms in place. That is an expense that I wasn't even prepared for. I had again to, for example, now where my daughter is, I'm not naming the school, they were told that they have to make sure they go with everything because no parcels will be allowed after they've gone back to school. You see, now that is putting parents in pressure. It isn't easy. But all in all, I welcome the move as a parent. It's high time because for my part, some of them were looking forward to finishing the school and all that. As I can say, the way Jasper has just said, I don't think the government was really prepared for these things. Because if you look at what is happening, even in the other counties and whatever, you'll see that pupils are actually still learning while seated down. That is not preparedness. That's my take.
Okay. And I want to find out from you, staying with you, Dorka, on the 12th of October, the children are
Mm.
going back to school. What was the mood like in the household? How was it after a 7 months break?
For my grade 4, he was like, "Mom, are we going back to school? I don't feel like I'm safe," and all that. I was like, your school so far, where he's going, I've already gone there. I've seen the preparations. They were top notch. The high school, the same thing. So when they were doing all this, the fumigation and the preparing and all that, uh, us as parents were being involved. We were being taken through it. But about the other schools, I'm not sure. But for where my children are, we as parents were being involved.
Just I
For
want to
the
bring you.
case of the high school,
Go
for the
ahead.
case of the high school, for the case of the high school, uh, since it was a public school, and that was more of an isolation center for the COVID-19 patients. So the fumigation and all that, we were taken through it again. And before they were even told to come back to school, they were even they made sure that they have bought new stuff, the beddings. They made sure that has happened. Yeah.
Just I want to bring you in from the perspective of a teacher. Students have come back to school, but it's the first time for them being in school in 7 months, and they're in school under very new circumstances and uncertain circumstances. How are children coping, or how do you predict that they will cope in the next month or two?
Thank you. Surprisingly, the learners came to school in high spirits. Most of them are in that particular mood of finishing school. School, I'm talking about the Form 4s. So the ministry asking them to go back to school was a relief for them, because some of them believe that they should, be done with school at the earliest opportune moment. So most of them are really excited. They are working. My learners, I had been engaging them in online classes, so there is no that big gap as far as interaction is concerned. So I can say that they're really determined to ensure that they do well come next year at the KCSE.
And as teachers, what were your expectations ahead of this reopening, and do you feel safe going back to classrooms?
We don't feel safe because one thing that you should look at is the medical cover. You look at teachers who work with the government, that is the Teacher Service Commission. They have a very weak medical cover, that is AON Minet, which someone was actually joking and saying that, that cover cannot even handle, when someone is infected with malaria. So here you have COVID-19. So in case a teacher is infected with COVID-19, then it is going to be upon him to get treated all over, even in the private sector. The eventuality, everybody is worried about the eventuality. What if you contract COVID-19? There was an example of USA when I was watching CNN, where a learner came to school and infected the teacher with COVID-19, and the teacher passed on as a result of that. So teachers are really worried that in case you contract COVID-19, then you are on your own. And I think the government ought to have addressed these issues as early as possible, or before even releasing the circular, so that it is very, very clear. And I expected the CS for Education to address a press conference, talk to the parents, to their hearts, instead of sending a circular which had very deep ramifications as far as reopening of schools is concerned. So I can say that it was really done in a casual manner, in a very simple manner, instead of addressing every aspect as far as the reopening is concerned. So teachers really do not feel safe. going forward.
Dorka, I want to bring you in. As a parent, you've gone to school, you've seen all the preparations that both your son's schools and your daughter's school have put. But also, when COVID was announced in the country, we saw Kenyans, our levels of adherence were really high. And then along the way, we began becoming lax and lax. And now we are seeing even Dr. Aman, who is the principal secretary at the Ministry of Health, warning that we risk a second wave of infection. In schools, why can't we afford to become lax when it comes to adherence of the COVID-19 protocols?
As a parent's side of view, we can't afford to be lax. We can't. Someone was speaking the other day on one of the TV stations, I can't recall, but the thing here is we cannot relax with these measures at all. Our children, you remember, even our teachers are there, our children are there. At least when the children were at home, we could warn them, like, you cannot go here, you cannot go there. If you know you're going here or whatever, make sure you put on your mask, make sure you wash your hands, make sure you sanitize, So, like, for now, we are just praying and hoping that this thing won't escalate in schools. Given again that our teachers are day scholars, not all of them stay in school. You understand? So this one also makes us a bit wary of our children's safety. But all in all, if we still say that they stay at home and all that, they're going to lose. 7 months is a long time for them to just sit at home. Remember, not everyone could afford for the children to do their studies online. So 7 months is a long time, but you're just praying and hoping that this thing does not escalate in schools, as far as we have seen what has happened in other countries, where when children resume school and immediately after that they close. So we are praying and hoping that that doesn't happen to us. So yeah, that's my take.
Jasper, let me throw the same question to you. Why must schools adhere to those guidelines 100%?
Because the consequences are dire. We've seen in various countries like France, there is a second resurgence of COVID-19, and President Emmanuel Macron is taking very serious steps to ensure that they contain COVID-19. So in Kenya, we cannot afford another resurgence of COVID-19. We know how our hospitals are ill-equipped to handle COVID-19. And therefore, we cannot really afford. And here we are dealing with the lives of very innocent children, very young. So we need to do everything to ensure that we protect the learners. But here is another case where the ministry is requiring the learners to have a mask. Making it mandatory for them to have masks. But you ask yourself, there are some places in this country, affording a mask is quite difficult. And if one can afford that particular mask, for example, that learner is likely to wear that mask for a whole month. And therefore, you are talking about, not necessarily COVID hitting the learners, but other diseases might hit the learners as a result of unwashed masks. So this is really a very tough scenario. And I hoped that the government was going to learn from Tanzania. Tanzania have been on session for quite some time now. Learners do not put on masks. I know there is, people asking questions about Tanzania. They are not transparent about the information. But I hoped that the government was really going to learn something from Tanzania, because even in Tanzania, those are children, the same children we have here, the same way we care for them, it is the same way that parents in Tanzania care for their children. So what is this that Tanzania is doing? We've not seen bodies lying in schools, in fields. What is this that Tanzania is doing that Kenya can do in order to protect the children? And therefore, we cannot really afford to relax, because relaxing again can take us back maybe several months again.
Okay, Dorka, I want to bring you in from parents' perspective. Jasper mentioned something very profound. A heavy amount of resources is needed to actualize reopening and learners staying in school from parents. I know that the reopening was abrupt and you have to pay school fees and you have to ensure your kids go back to school. Talk to us about that financial strain or burden or that financial shock that parents had to absorb rather all of a sudden.
Yeah, it is a financial burden, but as parents, we have to accept that it is our responsibility. Uh, as a parent, we were hoping and praying that at least if Mr. Magoha would have given us, just a bit of time and telling us that maybe schools can, we are planning to, not planning, but the schools will reopen maybe in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time. That way a parent can prepare him or herself. But now you're telling us these kids are going to school in the next 3 days. Where do you expect that parent to get money from? Remember, there are those who have been laid off. Remember, there are those who have pay cuts. There are those who do not have an income at all. Where do you expect these parents to get money from? And it is mandatory for these kids to go to school. So as a parent, I was taken aback, but I also wish that also the government, through the Ministry of Education, would have at least provide the essentials. As much as they're saying only the needy will need those essential stuff like the masks, not everybody can afford that. It's a pity because I saw it myself when I was taking my daughter to school the other day, and as much as yes, they're saying that it's only for the needy, it shouldn't be that way. It should be across board. Yes.
Jasper, what sort of resources or infrastructural investment needed to have been put in place or moving forward needs to be put in place to ensure that as learning continues, the health and well-being of these children is safeguarded?
The first one is infrastructure. Even before COVID-19 hit us hard, infrastructure was a problem. There were various stories on television how kids were learning under trees, how even some kids could not have desks. So infrastructure was the number one priority. The government of Rwanda partnered with the World Bank to construct 22,000 classrooms, which will be ready in some few days from now. So the government ought to have fixed the infrastructure aspect in schools. And it is quite really interesting in the circular that the CS wrote to the school principals and other stakeholders. Point number 2 in the circular said that in an event social distancing is constrained, then the head teachers should not send children to home, because that will be denying that particular child his right to education. In other words, the government has thrown in the towel. They're not going to fix the infrastructure aspect in schools. We also have other issues like resources such as books. I mean, some of these kids have never seen textbooks even before COVID-19 hit us hard. Then there is the issue about making desks. The government gave out 1.9 billion to make desks, but that was quite laughable because it is a drop in the ocean. We have schools really suffering. And even the amount of money that is sent to schools, the capitation is meager. And the government sent 20% last week instead of 30%. That means that the schools are going to be constrained. Then we have the issue of human resource. Kenya right now has a deficit of more than 100,000 teachers. The Teacher Service Commission employs about 5,000 teachers on an annual basis, which is again a drop in the ocean. So these particular extra classes that are going to be created, it needs teachers to attend to those particular classes. Now, where are these particular teachers? The teachers are going to be strained and they're not going to be given any allowance. And therefore, we were ill prepared for this reopening. There is a lot that is not in order, and the government ought to have taken time to make that to be coherent. I teach in a school that is quite privileged in terms of human resource, because with the creation of extra classes to accommodate social distancing, the management took a decision to hire more teachers so that we do not disadvantage those particular kids. So why was the government really not addressing these particular concerns? And I fault Kenyans for having a lackluster attitude. They are not showing outrage to government. Like, Dorka has already mentioned about the 1 week notice that was given by the CS. We could have seen the parents show outrage to the government, because giving a 1 week notice was completely unacceptable. For example, I have a couple of friends of mine who went to the village because the private schools they were teaching in were not paying them. So those particular friends of mine were given 1 week notice to come back to the city. They do not have rent. They do not have basic needs. So how is this teacher expected to go to class and deliver well? So I really do not understand why the CS could not have taken a very sober approach in this particular reopening. It was quite sudden and unnecessarily sudden.
Dorka, as we come to a close, I want to use Jasper's final remarks as the base for our conclusion. When we reopen, for the other students, as the government has sort of mentioned that they are monitoring to see the progress of the grade 4, standard 8 and form 4 before they can reopen for everybody. How should we do it differently? What different approach should the government take?
In what sense?
When they're reopening now for all the other students, because the government has said
Yes.
they're monitoring how the
Yes.
grade 4, standard 8 and form 4 learning will go, the disease patterns and curves in schools, and then they can make an executive decision whether to allow other students back to school. Should they allow other students? How should they do it differently, taking into consideration the welfare of the parent, the learner, and the situation in schools across the country?
As a parent, I would urge the government, first and foremost, to open school in phases. That is the first thing. The same way he has done with he started with the tertiary institution, then the secondary, primary, like that. So I'm hoping and praying that he'll open in phases, but first and foremost, he has to observe the situation that we are in first before he decides the other students to move in. And secondly, I'm hoping also that they'll put the infrastructure in place, just as Jasper has said, that are there enough desks for these kids? Are there enough spaces for these kids? If it is a boarding school, are there enough beds for them to sleep in? Because that is also a challenge. The infrastructure is actually the most important thing. And again, is there enough water? Remember, it's only in urban areas where we have flowing water. I'm not sure if our CS for education really visited all schools to ensure that there's running water, because that is one thing that I, as a parent, also I'm concerned. I prefer people washing their hands more than using the sanitizer. As much as the sanitizers are there, how sure are you that those sanitizers will be there? You understand? So that is my concern.
Okay.
But I'm praying that next time, if the government is opening the schools, let it open in phases. But first, let's see how this phase is going. If there's any like, they should try and take account of whatever they have not done.
Okay. That's where we leave our conversation for the day. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to our two guests, putting into perspective the reality of back to school from a teacher's perspective and from a parent's perspective. When we come back, Vincent Odhiambo will be taking you through social media on Social Watch.